Welcome to another episode of The Manufactured Mind. I'm your host, Roby. In today's episode, we're going to analyze the FDA's drug approval process, highlighting conflicts of interest, regulatory gaps, and public misconceptions about what FDA approval entails. It presents documented cases of drug harms and explores the economic and political factors influencing pharmaceutical regulation. So, inside FDA approval, documented conflicts, drug harms, and regulatory gaps. Excuse me. The FDA's drug approval system operates under significant documented conflicts of interest, with 65 to 75% of the human drug review budget now coming from pharmaceutical company fees. A revolving door sending 9 of 10 recent commissioners to industry jobs, and a track record that includes approving drugs later found to cause tens of thousands of deaths, folks. That is absolutely absurd. These structural issues coexist with a regulatory framework that treats supplements entirely different from drugs, and a public that largely misunderstands what quote-unquote FDA approved actually means. This research compiles documented evidence from government reports, peer-reviewed studies, court settlements, and congressional investigations to provide a factual foundation for understanding how pharmaceutical regulation works in America and where documented failures have occurred. So, the pharmaceutical money obviously flows into the FDA. How? Well, the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, the PDUFA, enacted in 1992, it fundamentally changed FDA's funding structure. What began as a supplemental revenue source has become the agency's primary funding for drug review. User fees now comprise 65 to 75% of the FDA's human drug review budget, up from just 7% in 1993. The numbers tell a striking story. The PDUFA fee revenue grew from $66 million in its first 5-year period between 93 and 97 to approximately $1.3 to $1.5 billion annually today. Total FDA user fees from industry now exceed $3.3 billion yearly, representing nearly half the agency's entire freaking budget. And a 2022 analysis in the Journal of Internal Medicine found that the majority of policy changes enacted through PDUFA legislation have favored industry through decreasing regulatory standards, shortening approval times, and increasing industry involvement in FDA decision-making. The authors noted that $1.3 billion could easily be replaced by general appropriations. It represents less than 1% of what Medicare spends on pharmaceuticals. The documented consequence, a landmark 2008 New England Journal of Medicine study by Carpenter et.al. found that drugs approved within 2 months of PDUFA deadlines were 5.5 times more likely to be withdrawn for safety reasons, 4.4 times higher likely to receive subsequent black box warnings, and 3.3 times more likely to have dosage form's discontinued deadline pressure appears to have safety cost. So the revolving door between the FDA and Big Pharma. The movement of personnel between FDA and the pharmaceutical industry is extensive and well documented, folks. 9 of the last 10 FDA commissioners from 2006 to 2019 went on to work for pharmaceutical companies after leaving the agency. Quite frankly, I don't think that should be allowed. Just like it's kind of the same situation with the military-industrial complex. How people always leave and go there after serving as the Secretary of War. The most striking example, Scott Gottlieb resigned as FDA Commissioner on April 5th, 2019, and joined Pfizer's board of directors 85 days later, earning approximately $330,000 annually in cash and stock. Before becoming commissioner, Gottlieb had received $559,000 from drug and device companies and served on GlaxoSmithKline's product investment board. A BMJ study tracking 55 FDA reviewers in hematology oncology found that of 26 who left the agency, 57%, later worked or consulted for the biopharmaceutical industry they previously regulated. A health affairs study found 38% of FDA appointees from 2004 to 2020 excited to industry positions. And hear this, the OxyContin approval offers a specific case study. Dr. Curtis Wright the fourth was the FDA medical review officer who approved OxyContin in 1995. 2 principal FDA reviewers who originally approved Purdue's oxycodone application both took positions at Purdue after leaving the agency, according to the AMA Journal of Ethics. And as of April 2025, amid FDA restructuring, former Commissioner Scott Gottlieb estimated that 600 drug reviewers had rescued themselves from approval processes because they were interviewing the pharmaceutical companies. And so, speaking of OxyContin, here's some documentation on the anatomy of a regulatory failure. The opioid crisis offers the most extensively documented case of FDA approval failure. Court settlements, DOJ findings, and congressional investigations have established a detailed record. In December of 1995, FDA approved OxyContin with label language stating that delayed absorption as provided by OxyContin tablets is believed to reduce the abuse liability of a drug. No clinical studies were conducted to support this claim, folks. In depositions from a 2004 lawsuit, Purdue officials admitted no such trials occurred before launch, and Purdue later claimed this language was added at FDA's suggestion. Wow. The FDA-approved label also stated iatrogenic addiction was very rare if opioids were used legitimately for pain management. Sales exploded from $48 million in 1996 to $3 billion in 2001 and 2002. Folks, that is only a 6-year period. That is a lot of money in 6 years. A 2002 FDA advisory committee was asked whether OxyContin's indication should be narrowed. 8 of 10 experts had financial ties to pharmaceutical companies, including Purdue. They advised against narrowing the indication. By then, overdose deaths were being reported nationwide. The legal record is definitive. In 2007, Purdue Frederick Company pled guilty to criminal misbranding, admitting that fraudulently marketed OxyContin as less addictive. The $634 million fine was followed in 2020 by an $8 billion DOJ settlement, including criminal felony pleas. In 2025, a $7.4 billion bankruptcy settlement was approved, with the Sackler family permanently banned from selling opioids in the United States. Good. Serves you right. Between 1999 and 2015, over 300,000 Americans died. I repeat, over 300,000 Americans died from overdoses involving opioids, many involving OxyContin, and the flood of opioid prescriptions it helped normalize. How ironic. Now let's move on to Vioxx, Avandia, and the pattern of post-market failures. Because OxyContin wasn't an isolated case. Vioxx, or Rofexizib, approved in 1999, was withdrawn in 2024 after FDA scientist Dr. David Graham estimated it caused 88,000 to 140,000 heart attacks in the U.S. alone, with 30 to 40% potentially fatal. The 2000 Vigor study had shown patients taking Vioxx had 4.25 times the relative risk of heart attack, but the FDA didn't update labeling until April of 2002. A Lancet meta-analysis concluded Vioxx should have been withdrawn several years earlier. The New England Journal of Medicine later issued an expression of concern, stating, Merck authors withheld critical cardiovascular toxicity data from published research. Over 80 million patients took the drug before withdrawal. Dr. Graham testified to Congress that the FDA, as currently configured, is incapable of protecting Americans against another Vioxx. And then Avandia. Rosiglitazone, I think is how you say that. That's the, I guess the generic name for it. Approved in 1999 for diabetes, was restricted by FDA in 2010 and withdrawn entirely in Europe after a 2007 meta-analysis found increased heart attack risk. Congressional reports revealed GlaxoSmithKline sat on early evidence of heart risks, and FDA knew of dangers months before informing the public. The pattern extends even farther, folks. So 462 medicinal products were withdrawn worldwide from 1953 to 2013 due to the adverse drug reactions. Nearly one-third, 27 to 29% of all novel drugs approved 2001 to 2015 required new post-market boxed warnings, meaning safety signals emerged after millions of patients were exposed. So what the evidence actually shows on SSRIs and methadone. So SSRIs, a 2025 analysis found the median clinical trial duration for antidepressants was just 8 weeks, while real-world median use in the U.S. is approximately 260 weeks, 5 years. long-term safety is extrapolated from short-term data. Documented long-term effects include sexual dysfunction, weight gain, emotional blunting, and increased risks of osteoporosis and bleeding disorders. Withdrawal symptoms are well established and often misdiagnosed as relapse. The serotonin hypothesis of depression that SSRIs correct a chemical imbalance lacks definitive proof, according to my research. SSRIs work, but the mechanisms appear more complex than the marketing suggests. The FDA has issued a black box warning for increased suicidal thoughts in children and adolescents. Moving on to methadone. Cross-sectional studies show lower bone mineral density in men on methadone maintenance therapy, with Z-scores of 1.1 at the lumbar spine and 1.0 at the total hip after median 11-year use. The mechanism: opioid-induced hypogonadism reduces testosterone, causing bone loss. Patients on opioids have twofold higher fracture risk when controlled for confounding variables. Other documented effects include QT prolongation, cardiovascular effects, immune system hyperactivation, and testosterone suppression. Then we have Suboxone. Says the FDA issued a 2022 warning about serious dental problems with sublingual formulations, hormonal effects, respiratory depression risk, especially with benzodiazepines, and physical dependence are documented concerns. However, long-term buprenorphine treatment, also known as Suboxone, reduces overdose events by 173% versus discontinuation. The evidence for life-saving benefits is strong. In an important context here, these medications have documented side effects requiring monitoring, but for methadone and buprenorphine specifically, the clinical evidence shows that reduced mortality from opioid use disorder. The question isn't whether side effects exist, they do, but whether informed patients and prescribers adequately weigh long-term risks. So I'm basically just trying to get people to be informed. That's all I'm doing, because I am no professional, doctor or therapist or anything. So, this is all based off of public knowledge research. So why supplements face different rules than drugs? Because, oftentimes you'll see stuff like supplements that say not FDA approved. And me personally, I think that's just a scam to get people to be in fear of using it because it takes money away from the pharmaceutical industry. That's my personal belief. So let's dive into the research. The regulatory landscape for supplements versus pharmaceuticals represents a fundamental policy choice, not an accident. The Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, also known as DSHEA, of 1994 classified supplements as food, not drugs. The result: FDA cannot require pre-market approval for safety or effectiveness. Manufacturers can introduce supplements without even notifying FDA unless the product contains a new dietary ingredient. The burden of proof is reversed. FDA must prove a supplement is adulterated or presents significant or unreasonable risk before taking action. The opposite of drugs, where manufacturers must prove safety and efficacy before approval. So why can't natural substances be approved as drugs? It's primarily economics. Drug development costs $800 million to $2.6 billion per approved drug. Natural ingredients used for centuries have extensive prior art, making patents difficult to obtain. Without patent protection providing market exclusivity, companies cannot recoup development investment. There's no conspiracy required. The economics simply don't work, meaning they can't make money off of it, like they do with pharmaceuticals. Over 50% of FDA-approved drugs are derived from natural products. Morphine from opium poppy, but it's then put through a chemical process. Aspirin from willow bark, all of this is put through a chemical process. Taxol from Pacific yew, penicillin from mold, and CBD as Epidiolex from cannabis. Natural substances can be approved, but someone must fund the clinical trials. The supplement industry has grown from roughly 4,000 products in 1994 to over 80,000 products today, representing a $60 billion domestic market. GAO found that in 2013, FDA inspected only 416 supplement manufacturers, 10% of an estimated 4,000 manufacturers. A 2010 GAO study found trace amounts of heavy metals in 93% supplements tested. Consumer surveys show 50% of Americans incorrectly believe supplements are approved by the government. No. If they read the freaking bottle, they all say not approved. But it's up to you to do the research and not jump on the very first thing you see. And most of the time, not all the time, but in my experience, it's been the more pricier supplements tend to be the more well-tested ones. Third-party testing. You got to look for that on there, on the supplements. So what FDA approved actually means and what consumers believe. A 2017 FDA-funded national survey revealed a profound gap between what FDA approved means and what Americans think it means. The reality. FDA approval means the agency reviewed clinical trial data and determined that benefits outweigh known risks for the intended use. It does not mean the drug is safe for everyone, that all long-term effects are known, or that the drug will cure the condition. What consumers believe. 42.9% did not know that FDA-approved drugs may cause harm. 75% incorrectly believed an approved drug will help most people who use it. 75%. 31% incorrectly believe FDA approves advertisements before they air. 25% incorrectly believe FDA approves dietary supplements. The FDA does not test drugs itself, folks. It reviews manufacturer submitted data. And that right there should be the biggest red flag ever. They're putting the trust in the hands of the manufacturer. So the manufacturer can say whatever the hell they want just to get the drug on the shelf to sell. Clinical trials typically involve 3,000 to 5,000 patients over months, which cannot detect rare events or long-term effects. Over 400 currently approved medications carry black box warnings, the FDA's most serious safety alert demonstrating that approved and completely safe are not synonymous. Direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising compounds the confusion. FDA enforcement letters for advertising violations dropped from over 130 annually in the late 90s to just 3 in 2023. Pharmaceutical companies spent $369.8 million on social media advertising alone in 2020. The lobbying machine behind pharmaceutical regulation. The pharmaceutical industry's political influence is the largest of any sector and has been since 1999. And in 2024, lobbying expenditures of $294 to $391 million, depending on categorization, with PHRMA alone spending $31.7 million. The industry deployed 738 lobbyists through 139 companies for pharmaceutical manufacturing alone. 2/3 of pharmaceutical lobbyists previously held government positions, and campaign contributions totaled approximately $16 million in the 2024 cycle, with $89 million in the 2020 cycle, representing a 170% increase from 2010. This spending occurs during a regulatory framework where FDA depends on industry for nearly half its budget, and where each PDUFA reauthorization creates a must-pass legislative vehicle that constrains Congress's ability to modify FDA industry negotiated commitments. And so, as we get to the conclusion, the documented problems and contested solutions. The documented evidence establishes several facts relevant to understanding FDA pharmaceutical regulation. Structural conflicts are real. 65 to 75% industry funding of drug review. Extensive revolving door between FDA and Big Pharma, and $300+ million in annual lobbying creates documented incentive misalignments. Safety failures have occurred. Oxycontin, Vioxx, and Avandia represent cases where FDA-approved drugs cause documented mass harm. These aren't allegations. They're established through court settlements, DOJ findings, and peer-reviewed research. And then, consumer understanding is inadequate, as most Americans don't understand that FDA approval doesn't guarantee safety, or that approved drugs regularly cause harm requiring market withdrawal or black box warnings. And then the supplement and drug divide is economic, not conspiratorial. Natural substances can become approved drugs. Over half of approved drugs derive from natural sources. But, as I said before, it's put through a chemical process. So it's kind of taking the natural out of it when it goes through the chemical process. But the economics of clinical trials favor patentable compounds. Profit is basically what that's saying. Long-term effects remain understudied. So, particularly for psychiatric medications, trials lasting weeks are used to justify prescriptions lasting years. Red flag. What's contested as interpretation, whether these problems represent systemic corruption requiring fundamental reform or inevitable limitations of any regulatory system that could be improved incrementally. The documented evidence supports serious examination. It doesn't automatically validate any particular conclusion about intent or solution. This research provides a factual foundation. The OxyContin case alone, with its documented conflicts of interest, fraudulent marketing, and hundreds of thousands of deaths. The evidence shows a system with documented problems. How to characterize those problems and what to do about them remains a matter for informed debate. The gap between what consumers believe FDA approved means and what it actually guarantees provides another powerful angle that's supported by FDA's own research. But the point is, folks, is to just stay informed. You gotta stay informed. Do your research. Don't jump on the first thing that you're told about, as far as medication goes. Just do your research. That's all I'm saying. But that's gonna do it for today. I hope everyone has enjoyed this episode. I hope everybody has found some insight into this and maybe learned something. But without further ado, that's going to do it for today. This is Roby, and you all have a good one, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace out.